BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Denis Norden, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir. And here's round one to test their respective vocabularies. 2 marks if they get the meaning of these words right. We begin this week with Anne Scott James. Anne, what is a palmiped? P-A-L-M-I-P-E-D, palmiped.
Well, it must be a sort of acrobat who walks on his hands, I should think.
No, you got them at both ends.
Well, the ped part's obviously something to do with its feet.
Yes.
And the palmy part, if it isn't like its hands, it must be something in the shape of a palm tree.
Yes?
I should think it means web-footed.
Absolutely dead right. It's web-footed. Animal, usually a bird, that is web-footed. Frank Muir, what is a Nattier blue? N-A-T-T-I-E-R, a Nattier blue.
Well, it's the colour of Christopher Robin's nanny's new Carnaby Street dressing gown. It's a Nattier blue, but it hasn't a hood. No?
I think you may be right, but we haven't defined it.
Well, it's the colour of a French postage stamp.
Yes, that's better. French is right.
Or an Australian mountain. Or butterfly. French butterfly.
Well, sort of like
Do you remember
French.
who invented it?
It's like a choufleur
Nattier.
blanc.
Yes?
Nattier invented it.
That's right.
Monsieur Nattier.
Yes.
Yes, you're dead right.
Yes.
Can you elucidate a little?
Absolutely right. Nattier blue is a very soft shade of blue. It was very much used by this particular French painter, J.M. Nattier, who died in 1766.
Oh, poor fellow.
2 marks.
No.
Dilys Powell, the meaning of the word somatic. S-O-M-A-T-I-C, somatic.
Somatic. I think it ought to come from Aldous Huxley's reference to Soma, which encouraged people in his book Brave New World to be very kind of agreeable and amenable and do anything they like. No? No?
There's a
like
line in the lyric, isn't there? Psychosomatic symptoms.
That's right.
Difficult
Bodily.
to endure.
That's right.
Bodily.
That's all I wanted.
It was bodily.
You were making it very complicated, Dilys.
Sorry.
Somatic means of the body, physical, corporeal, and the opposite of mental or psychic, and comes from a Greek word meaning just the body, like that. Psychosomatic means a mixed-up case with bits and bits of one bit of one and one bit of the other, as it were. Now, Denis Norden, what is a ghoul? G-H-O-U-L.
Well, it's a word that was a boon to joke writers. Frank and I once did a musical version of Dracula, in which we wrote a song called "Demons Are a Ghoul's Best Fiend."
What's interesting is it didn't get any applause then.
Sit around these studios long enough.
But you haven't said what it does, Dennis.
It's a sort of nasty kind of ghost.
Yes, and it does something rather particularly nasty.
I have no doubt. I don't know. It sort of comes back and preys on people in some way.
That's right. I think you haven't quite got the main point, which is the nastiest of the lot. I'll give you 1.5. A ghoul is a spirit that preys on corpses. This is the nasty thing about it. 1.5. Before we start round 2, I give each team a quotation for them to write down, and then I want the 2 women members of the team to go on studying those quotations, because at the end of the programme, I shall ask for the source of those quotations. Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, your quotation is, "Where there's a will, there's a way." And Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, yours is, "They also serve who only stand and wait. And then at the end of the programme, I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their ideas of how these came to be said or written. Well, next, a round of word origins. I want to know what the following words mean and how did these names originate? And 2 marks again. And Scott James, Hock, H-O-C-K, Hock.
What does it mean now?
And how did it come to mean that?
Well,
Yes.
it means either a wine or a bit of a horse.
I want the whiny bit.
You want the winey bit. Well, it's a rather delicious light white wine, apt to be oversweet, which comes in a bottle with a long neck.
And from where?
Well, it comes from Hockenheim,
You're very nearly right.
province of Germany. Can you help?
You're so very
from
nearly
Greece.
right, Anne. Not quite.
Hockheim.
What?
Hockheim?
That's right.
Oh.
And where would you find Hockheim?
Oh, Rhine-wise.
Yes, all right. 2 marks it is. Hock is a German white wine, definitely from the Rhine Valley, and it should really be used only for the bit that is produced in and around Hochheim, which is one of the vineyard towns on the Rhine, but now is applied generally to any Rhine wine. Used in England to be called Hockamore, but we dropped it to make it short. Frank Muir, Puce.
It's movie, isn't it? Didn't you say?
Yes, kind of a dull
Movie.
mauve,
Yeah.
yes.
Dull mauve, not an exciting mauve.
Uh,
Movie rather than mauve. And it comes from Puce. It can't
Or
be.
Puce.
yes, you're getting it right.
My distinguished colleague thinks it comes from the French. Puce,
Yes.
which means a flea.
We've got it. 2 marks. It means purplish-brown in colour, and it was intended as meaning flea-coloured, because the word itself is the French word for a flea.
Pusillanimous means when all the fleas decide to jump together. Meanly.
Now, Dilys Powell, Percheron, P-E-R-C-H-E-R-O-N.
Sorry?
Percheron.
It's a horse.
Percheron's a horse, one of those large horses, with a lot of fur around the bottom of its legs.
Yes.
It comes from somewhere called Perche.
Yes, it does.
Oh.
No, no, stick
Perche.
to
Perche.
what... And where would that be?
In Flanders. Would it?
Hence the
Would it
royal
be Flanders?
connection.
I think that'll do. I think that's near
Flanders
enough.
mare.
Flanders.
Percheron is a breed of very strong farm horses, and it's named after the district in France where they were bred, which is a place called Le Perche. And that's why it came to have that name. Denis Norden, the Adelphi.
It's a theatre in the Strand famous for Charlie Girl.
I can't
How
fault
it got the name?
I can't fault that, but can you think of another building with the same name?
Well, along there, I think I always thought that whole stretch along up to Aldwych
Yes.
there was called Adelphi, not the Adelphi.
That's right. Do you remember why?
Oh, brothers.
Yes?
Built by the brothers Adam, I should
Yes,
think.
you've got
Jolly
it.
good.
And Adelphi is the Greek
I
for
go with that.
brothers.
2 marks it is. Well, I'd unforgivably forgotten the theatre, but it was originally the name given to a block of places where people lived, residential buildings off the Strand, and they were designed in 1768 by Robert Adam and his 3 brothers, who were architects, interior decorators, and so on. Most of it has now been pulled down, but it has been a very famous place where famous people have lived, and it just means, it's a Greek word, Adelphoi, meaning the brothers. 2 marks. Well, now around about characters in novels and about the authors who created them. 2 marks again. And Scott James, where would you find Charles Swann and Odette de Crécy?
Well, I would find them in Proust.
And who were they?
Well, Swann was the hero of Le Côté de chez Swann,
Yes.
and Odette was his mistress, whom, although he adored her, he never really liked.
Yes. That's it. 2 marks it is. This is Marcel Proust's Remembrance of Things Past, La Recherche du Temps Perdu, and Charles Swann was the hero of one part of this long set of novels. Odette was his mistress, and later I think became his wife.
Oh, no.
Didn't she? Didn't she?
I don't think so. It ends up as that marvellous sentence that he'd spent the best years of his life
That's
with a
right.
woman he'd never really cared for.
That's right, he did.
Which I think is wonderful.
Anyway, the mistress is, I know, accurate. Frank Muir, in which works by which author would you find the character Stephen Dedalus?
It's in Ulysses by James Joyce.
Yes?
In another one.
It is, yes.
Portrait of the artist as a young man.
Quite right. 2 marks.
Also
well done.
by James Joyce.
Stephen Dedalus, who's often taken to be, in a sense, autobiographical, to represent Joyce himself, comes in Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man and, more famously, in Ulysses. Dilys Powell, in what book by what author was Arthur Corkran introduced, and by what nickname was he better known? C-O-R-K-R-A-N, Arthur Corkran. And he's known better by a nickname.
I think the nickname's Corky.
Not quite. Very nearly.
Oh, it's Kipling.
Yes?
It's Kipling,
Stalky.
Stalky and Co.
Mine was P.G. Woodhouse.
Stalky and Co. by Rudyard
You had a
Kipling.
absolutely splendid clue from Frank, I think. Jolly good. Rudyard Kipling, in the schoolboy story Stalky and Co., and Arthur Corkran, his nickname was Stalky, though Stalky appears in some other short stories of Kipling at a later stage. 2 marks. Denis Norden, what was the name of Nicholas Nickleby's father?
Outside of Mr. Nickleby Senior, he doesn't have one for very long. I haven't read this for a year, because he goes straight on to Wackford Squeers.
That's right.
Very early on.
This is a rather trick question, I think, Dennis.
Was he an orphan?
Well, he was an orphan to that extent, but I was presumably...
No, that's all right. No, there was a father. Sorry, he died. But it's trick in another way.
Well, whichever way it's tricky. I give up.
It was the same as his son. The father, too, was called Nicholas Nickleby.
I say, that's tricky. Fooled me, didn't you?
Well, now we come to the last round, and go back to those quotations I gave the 2 teams earlier in the programme. For 2 marks, Anne Scott James, can you give me the origin of the quotation, where there's a will, there's a way?
I don't think there is any origin, except it's just a proverb. It goes back into the mists of antiquity.
Adam.
Handed down from...
Adam said it.
Yep. That's
Father
good.
to son.
That's good enough. It is. It's a proverb. I don't know where it starts. It was in a collection of proverbs made in 1640 by John Herbert, in Book of Proverbs that he gathered together. But I think that's quite good enough. Now, Dilys Powell, can I have the origin of your quotation? They also serve who only stand and wait.
It's the last line of Milton's sonnet on his blindness.
As it is, that's quite right. It's Milton writing sonnet on his blindness, thousands at his bidding speed, and post or land and ocean without rest, they also serve who only stand and wait. 2 marks. Well, now I'm going to ask Frank and Dennis to give me their explanations of how these quotations came into being, and for this round, the marks will go to whichever incredible explanation receives the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So we go back to Denis Norden and his quotation, where there's a will, there's a way.
The first hint that I had when I was developing a waistline was a day I got into my car and had to let out the safety belt, which was very worrying. And when I got home, I dashed up to the bathroom, stripped off, stood sideways to the mirror, and sure enough, I had a profile like a duffel bag. It was shattering. I left that bathroom in a state that can only be described as sadder but wider. Well, what does a chap do in that situation? Well, my friends were unanimous. Exercise. Have you noticed how vehement people get when they're urging physical exertion on someone else? And they was going for this rather prissy line about, don't forget your body is like a, whatever. But one chap actually said, your body is like your house. You have a duty to keep it trim. I very soon put him in his place. I said, to keep my house trim, a woman comes twice a week. It did seem that the only answer was exercise, and that's not something that I'm really madly enthusiastic about. It's true that for a number of years I played tennis every weekend, but I had to give that up at the age of 38 because I lost the ball. And since then I've never really taken any exercise. I think about the only time is when the electric toothbrush packs in and I get a bit of arm exercise then. But I didn't fancy at all this idea of spending hours every week bending and stretching. And you can imagine my relief when I discovered the wheel. Have you come across the wheel? It's in all the chemist shops. It's a sort of gadget designed specifically for reducing waistlines. It's a sort of, what it is, a small wheel, rather like a pram wheel. It's got handles either side. And what you do is you kneel on the floor and you grasp the handles and you push the wheel out along the floor to arm's length and pull it back again. And it only takes about 2 minutes in the morning, about 2 minutes in the evening. You do it a dozen times and you finish up with a waistline that's all lean and steely. So I bought one, a wheel. And that very night, I couldn't wait. As soon as I got my pajamas, I knelt on my knees on the floor, grasped both hands firmly, both the handles firmly, pushed the wheel out to its full length, and then went to put it back again. Now, there's one thing I should have remembered. I have this trick back. It's not exactly a slit disc. It's a kind of muscular thing. It isn't an illness. It's one of those things that if it was a car, it would be marked as not covered by maker's guarantee. The effect of it is that when I get in certain positions, I lock. I just lock. And that's what happened to me that night. I locked into this crouch, on all fours, arms slightly extended, and a wheel between my hands. To visualize it, if you could project into your mind a wheelbarrow. Any? Need that. Now, just put 2 hands either side of the wheel. Now you've got it. That was me. Now, when I do get this sort of locking of the back, there's this chap in Wimpole Street, actually, who knows exactly where to bash, which vertebrae to bash that puts me back into working order again, you see. But the trouble was, how to get to him. So I couldn't move from this position, you see. However, very luckily, Frank was staying with us, and he's terribly... It's this sort of situation that seems to bring out the best in Frank. And he said immediately, he said, what we must do, he said, is push another wheel between his knees. He said, then we can pull him to Wimpole Street. But it's a pretty ignominious way to go through Regent's Park. On all fours, wheels between hands and knees, my tie knotted round Frank's rear bumper. On the back of my jacket, a crudely lettered placard on toe, to say nothing of where they put the little red light. It did teach me one thing, though. If your middle starts to inflate, let it. At the very worst, it comes in quite useful as an ashtray. And the only thing a middle-aged male really needs to exercise is caution. So to this day, I can't see one of those gadgets in anybody's house without a shudder. And of course, the thought, where there's a wheel, there's a waist.
Well, that was a day I wish I'd been in Regent's Park and wasn't. And so we go on to Frank Muir and his storyline. They also serve who only stand and wait.
Listening to Denis's story as it very gradually unfolded, I was musing here on the nature of somebody being hurt like that. And I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes, 40 or 50, the doors are locked, about agony. And when I say agony, I mean A-G-G-O-N-Y. I mean severe pain. Now, it is quite clear to me that the origin of pain is working land, is in farming. I'm not just making this up, incidentally. The whole gist of this was hollered to me across a crowded room at a party by a man called Phil, who later turned out to be a philologist. This is the real truth, the derivation of these words. The origin of pain is in a garden. When I started this spring to organize my garden, I took advice from a very rich neighbor who lived on an estate in the village. At the bottom of the garden was the 18th hole, you know. The village is just going onto main drainage. And he said to me, "Don't use old-fashioned methods, old boy. You must mechanize." So I bought a huge mower, 36 inches wide, started it up, tremble, tremble, bash, bash, bash. In half an hour, my self-winding watch had a nervous breakdown. And after 2 hours, my hands were shaking when I'd finished, poured a beer, flung it all over the wallpaper, got on my bike and trembled straight into a wall. 4 stitches. 4 stitches in the head. Pain, you see. Didn't mow. One morning, August came down, said, "My wife, has been snowing." She said, "They're daisies." So I bought a sprayer, mechanized. Don't do things by hands, mechanize. It's a 2-gallon container, plastic, pump on top. You pump, 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 pump. Then you spray, it said, but you pump, 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 and you pump, and you pump. The palms of the hand, after 5 minutes, were going a sort of faint pinky colour in blotches, rather like the starts of bubonic plague. No good. So I thought, chuck all these things away, go back to first principles. If I'm going to weed the lawn, the thing to do is to do it standing up so that one isn't bent over and locked like Denis. Nothing, you've got a grip, no work, got a broomstick. Put a nail at the end, 4-inch nail, very thin plastic tube, wound with sticky tape all the way up, old-fashioned motor car horn full of weed killer at the top. Principle, stand up, pierce the daisy, touch the bulb lightly with a hand. Marvellous. Weed killer injected into the heart of the root. It worked marvellously. I stood there, held the broom up with its spike at the bottom, very lightly, no need to blister the hands, and thrust heavily downwards. The curious thing about thrusting downwards is the thing doesn't go straight. I don't know why this is, but it just does not. Went right through my foot. Pierced my foot. Well, I'm out of hospital now. The agony is abated. So I say to you, I say to all those people who say, well, it's your own fault. I mean, thinking you can use great heavy industrial equipment when you're not used to it. You think you can labour when you're not used to it. No wonder you suffer. I say to them with hand on my heart and foot in a bandage, they also suffer who only stand and weed.
Well, by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Denis Norden wins the contest of the 2 stories, and that brings us to a final score in which the entire contest is a dead heat.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Denis Norden, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir. Here's round one, which tries to test their respective vocabularies. For 2 marks, as are possible, I want them to give me the answer to the meaning of the following words. We begin with Anne Scott James. Anne, what's the meaning of aviate?
To flap like a bird, or to fly, or to propel a flying machine.
2 marks it is, well done. Aviate means to fly in or to fly. In other words, you could either be a passenger or you could be the pilot, and more importantly, the pilot of an aircraft. 2 marks. Frank Muir, what is a picnic? P-Y-K-N-I-C. A picnic.
It's a... when the English eat out in the open, they sit down in the grass, and after a while somebody says, "Why do we come out here and get bees in the marmalade and ants all over us and rain in the tea? It's a picnic with a Y in it."
No marks.
Or, on the other hand, my lovely and talented partner has got a ridiculous... is under the impression that it means a short, stout type of female.
Not necessarily female.
Short, stout type of anything. It means sort of non-me.
That's exactly it. Yes, though I'd hesitate...
Not non-you, because you're a bit like that, but...
I hesitate to mention it, but the exact opposite of it is a thing called asthenic, which is exactly what Frank Muir looks like, which is very, very tall and long and thin. A picnic, with the Y, is a person characterized by thick neck, large stomach, and relatively short legs. And it comes from a Greek word, puce, which means with the clenched fist, that is, all bunched up together. Exactly the opposite of Frank Muir. 2 marks. Dilys Powell, what is a wilding? W-I-L-D-I-N-G, a wilding.
Could be a plant, something growing wild.
Yes, of a particular kind.
Self-sown.
That's what I wanted. 2 marks it is. Well done. Denis Norden, what is bald money? 1 word. Bald money.
That's a good word. Bald money. Well, your income tax would be bald money because it's money that you have to pay.
Pin money, we think it might be.
No marks. Bald money is a yellow-flowered umbelliferous plant. It could be the yellow gentian, otherwise it's a thing called the mew, M-E-W. Well, before we begin round 2, I give each team a quotation for them to write down, and then I want the 2 women members of the teams to study those quotations particularly, because at the end of the programme, I shall ask them where the quotations come from. And Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, your quotation is, "Look before you leap." And Dilys Powell and Frank, yours is a rather sad one. "I ain't got no body, and there's nobody cares for me." And then at the end of the programme, I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their explanation of how these came to be said or written. Round 2 is a round of odds and ends. 2 marks for correct answers. Anne Scott James, what's the difference between the Costa Brava and the Costa del Sol?
One is in the sort of top right-hand corner of Spain, and the Costa del Sol is in the south to the east of Gibraltar.
The actual difference is about £17.12.
Yes.
8 days, no nights.
I think that's accurate enough to get the 2 marks. Costa Brava comprises the Catalonian seaside resorts of the Spanish Mediterranean coast from the French frontier right down to Barcelona. The Costa del Sol is made up of the coastal resorts of southern Andalusia, whatever you call it, from Malaga right round as far west as Estepona, which is not terribly far from Gibraltar. 2 marks. Frank Muir. Margaretha was a Dutch-born woman who posed as a Javanese and spied for Germany from 1905 until her final execution in 1917. By what name was she better known?
Well, there's only one, isn't there? Mata Hari.
Absolutely right.
Whose name is an anagram of a hair mat.
Crossword king, Frank. It's all you've got to beat him on that. Mata Hari it is. Dennis Powell, what does Mardi Gras stand for, and what's its literal meaning?
Its literal meaning is rather fat. Tuesday, Fat Tuesday.
Greasy Tuesday.
Greasy Tuesday, yes.
And why?
Well, because the day before Ash Wednesday,
Yes.
you eat as much, not only grease, but anything that you can get. You have a jolly good blowout.
Mm-hmm. Hello, yes. It's the French name for Shrove Tuesday, which is the last day of the Carnival, which comes before Lent, not only in France, but in other Catholic countries too. It is literally Fat Tuesday, but I think the grease is the wrong impression. After all, if you get a hors d'oeuvre in France, you either have a very little plate, which I think called maigre, or you have lots and lots and lots of hors d'oeuvres on the same plate, which is called gras.
I can never afford those.
With a plate of grass, I didn't bother.
Denis Norden, who was the Swedish match king, and what happened to him?
Well, his name was Kruger.
Yes.
And he committed suicide.
Yeah.
And I think he figures fictitiously or under a thin guise in a novel by Graham Greene.
Yes, fair enough. 2 marks it is. Ivar Kreuger, I think it is, I'm not quite certain, who had financial operations on an enormous scale, particularly in the United States and Sweden and France, but crashed, and he was detected in fraud and forgery and committed suicide, I think, by jumping out of an aeroplane in around about the late 1920s. He was the match king. 2 marks. And now a round of origins of words and expressions. I want to know what the following words mean now and how their names originated. 2 marks again. Anne Scott James, crisis.
Well, it's a Greek word.
Yes?
Well, when you're sort of in an extremely bad illness, you reach a moment when you're either going to live or die.
Yes, that's all right. A turning point in general affairs at which you ought to be able to decide which way things are going to go, bad or good. It was originally the crisis of an illness, and it meant the ability to judge what was going to happen. And the very famous Greek physician Hippocrates said that all diseases had their moments when the humours of the body ebbed and flowed, and these tidal days he called critical days, and the tide itself was called a crisis, because on that day, or those days, the physician could decide which way the patient was going to go, I mean, either good or bad, towards recovery or death. 2 marks. Frank Muir, lucky break.
It means serendipity, really, doesn't it?
Yes,
It means something,
yeah.
Something fortunate but unlooked for happening to you.
Yes? Comes from?
It comes from the Greek again. It was Aristophanes whose mother-in-law fractured her ankle just before coming to visit for a month. Is it a game?
Yes.
Is it a billiards, then?
Yes, not quite billiards.
Snooker?
Yes, snooker. What happens at the beginning of the game? How do you start?
There's a triangle. The ball's put in a triangle in what's called a frame, and the frame is flung lightly over the shoulder. And you then hit a ball from the other end of the table. You rush around the table with a cue, and you hit a ball, probably a white one, and it strikes with a bit of luck, this triangle. And they all scatter with a clicking noise.
I'm going to give you your 2, which is a bit charitable, because Frank is obviously not a terribly good snooker player because it's impossible to miss that triangle, whatever you miss later on.
Speak for yourself.
It means nowadays a stroke of good luck or a sudden turn in events which leads to the situation being better. But it comes from snooker, or in America, pool. At the start of the game, as Frank quite rightly says, the balls are racked up together in a triangular formation, and the first player then simply has to hit that triangle, and it turns on if it's a good break or a bad break, whether the following player, his opponent, is able to score or not. I mean, otherwise you can make an awful mess of the chap's next stroke, either by design or by luck. 2 marks anyway. Dilys Powell, furtive, F-U-R-T-I-V-E, furtive.
Means secret, self-concealing, doing something in a kind of hidden way, secret way.
And it comes from?
I think it comes from being a thief or something. Does it come from being a thief?
Yes, in which language?
Latin.
Yes. All right, 2 it is. Furtive means stealthy or sly or something which is done by stealth or clandestine, and comes from Latin word fur, which is a thief, or furtim by stealth, or stolen or hidden, which is the Latin adjective furtivus. And the latter word, furtivus, has been carried over into English almost exactly as it is, furtive. And a furtive movement or a furtive glance is one the maker of that thing tries to conceal. 2 marks. Denis Norden, Havoc, which can be either H-A-V-O-C or H-A-V-O-C-K, Havoc.
Oh, well, now, anybody who, like me, has gone through the misery of doing Julius Caesar, when you come to revision, just before you take the exam, you'll find a line that says, "Cry havoc and let loose the dogs of war." And next to that, in the margin, will be a whole scrunched up, crammed bit of writing explaining what the word havoc means, which will be given at least 3 or 4 versions. Now, as I recall, what the line actually means is not what it means today. In other words, it doesn't mean when you create havoc and means today you make a mess of desolation of something. It was cry havoc, let loose the dogs of war meant let's get to the plunder and get the fighting over.
Yeah.
So that havoc means actually plunder or meant in that line, actually plunder or booty.
Well done, Dennis. 2 marks it is. And now we come to the last round, and we go back to those quotations I gave the 2 teams earlier on in the programme. For 2 marks, Anne Scott James, can you give me the origin of your quotation, "Look before you leap"?
I don't think there is an origin. I don't think it was a named origin. I think it's anonymous, proverbial, or an adage.
Yes, I think you're right. 2 marks. It turns up first in the English language in 1350, and it's rather nice. It's loke, L-O-K-E, and afterwards leap, L-E-P-E. Then it's in Haywood's Book of Proverbs in 1548. Ye may learn good cheap to look or ye leap, and then Lilly in Euphues. In things of great importance, we commonly look before we leap. But I'm bound to give you again your 2 marks. But Dilys Powell, I'd like the origin of your quotation, which was, "I ain't got nobody, and there's nobody cares for me."
It's a song.
It's a song.
A rather popular song pre-war, I should think about the 20s or even earlier.
A little earlier.
In the teens.
19s.
In the 19s, yes.
You don't remember who wrote it? Or
I don't think I ever knew, frankly.
well, 1 out of 2. It was written in 1915. The words are by Roger Graham, and they went, "I ain't got nobody, and there's nobody cares for me. I'm so sad and lonely. Won't somebody come and take a chance with me?" Which doesn't scan awfully well. But the music was by Spencer Williams and Dave Payton. Oh, now I'm going to ask Frank and Dennis to give me their explanation of how these quotations came into being. And for this round, the marks will go to whichever incredible explanation receives the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So back to Denis Norden and his quotation, "Look before you leap."
Well, I last heard this dreadful old proverb, or rather a variant of it, on the most terrifying aeroplane flight I ever had in my life. Now, given a chance, given a choice, let me say that I would always prefer to take a train rather than an aeroplane. I think it's that my imagination is too strong. When I'm in a plane, I simply sit there envisaging things. One thing I hate is when the captain's voice comes through and starts, "If you look to your left, you will see Geneva, and beyond that, the Alps." I hate that because it means he's not looking straight ahead. You know. And on a flight recently, we were over a range of mountains, and the captain's voice came through to say, "Ladies and gentlemen, would you please fasten your seat belts and remove your hats?" I clutched at the stewardess, which under normal circumstances can be quite pleasant. But, when you hear it, I said, "What do we have to take our hats off for?" And she said, "We're going to fly the rest of the way upside down." And I said, "For heaven's sake, why?" She said, "Instructions from London Airport." And with that, the whole plane looped the loop. Well, I don't know if any of you have ever flown upside down for any distance. If so, let me give you a tip. First of all, make sure that you've removed that meal tray. The second thing is, try not to sit next to a man wearing a kilt. I tell you, it was an absolute nightmare. My tie kept going up my nose. Well, when we finally landed, I couldn't wait to grab the captain, and I said, "Why? What did we do that for?" And he said, "We had a mechanical defect." And I said, "What kind of?" He said, "The first engineer suddenly found a hole in the bottom of the petrol tank." So we radioed. Obviously, it was when it's explained, it becomes obvious. They radioed back to Heathrow, and Heathrow told them to fly upside down. Which is why, as I say, the last time I heard that was this terrible old proverb, but so terrifyingly different, was when Heathrow radioed, "If you have a hole in the bottom of your petrol tank, loop before you leak."
I feel just the same as Denis does. But we go back to the other storyline for Frank Muir. I ain't got nobody, and there's nobody cares for me.
I ain't got nobody. Nobody cares for... It's going to be my birthday very soon, and I want to talk to you about parties. Now, the word party, according to the Oxford Dictionary, comes from the Latin word partere, meaning to part. So the object of a party is to assemble a number of people together with the idea of separating them from something. Now, at a party, things which guests can well become separated from are their inhibitions, front teeth, outer and upper clothing, husbands or wives, temporarily or permanently, wigs, handbags, and the desire ever to go to another damn party ever again. Parties in history. 1773, Boston Tea Party. Wasn't really a party at all, actually. What happened was a lot of Bostonians got a bit peeved at the tea tax which had been imposed on the port of Boston. So that morning they rowed out, thinly disguised as Indians, climbed aboard the English ships with the tea on, and tipped it into the harbour. My researches show they did this very methodically. one chest of tea to each member of the boarding party, and one for the port. So much for parties in history. Now, there are various sorts of parties. If you had a party in which no food substantial enough to need a fork to convey it to the mouth is given, and the noise level is equal to the number of decibels created by a circular saw 3 inches from the ear, that is a cocktail or drinks party. If there's a party in which nobody talks to each other, everybody either overeats, eats nothing at all, or is sick, and everybody has a marvellous time, that is called baby's first birthday party. If, on the other hand, it's an office party, which the general public doesn't know about, and there's much jollification, it's not a party at all, technically, it's an orgy. From the Latin orgia, which means secret, frantic revels. Now, party food. Party food normally consists, at rock bottom, of a plate of elderly crisps, looking and tasting like autumn leaves. Sometimes you get rather better food, but normally speaking, party food consists of a glass bowl of shaving foam in which is lightly grated onion and mousetrap cheese. This is called garlic whip. Or the small, soggy pieces of ancient toast, which are smeared with cleansing cream, or hard dripping, or rissole crumbs, or the tails of sardines. Those are called canapé. Or you have a small pot of white impact adhesive warming over a nightlight, which is known as Swiss fondue. Drinks create a problem these days because you can't drink the hard stuff, because if you drink you can't drive, and if you can't drive you can't get there. So what you are given is one of two things usually. One is watered down vinegar which has some pepper put in it, and it is heated to a temperature of 140 degrees, and that's known as mulled claret. And the alternative to that is seawater with half a bottle of cider in it, which is called champagne cup. Behaviour at party usually consists of shaking the guest's hand at the door and telling him such a long story that the guests trying to come in pile up behind you like a rugger queue, taking snuff so that people around you with a mouthful of vol-au-vent start sneezing. And so on. In fact, parties are so awful that at my birthday, and I've got to give one, I didn't know how to organise one that would be at all pleasant. And then last night, I found the solution. I'm not going to give one. I'm going to pretend I've broken my leg and had a lucky break, you know. And I'm just going to lie back on my birthday, the night of my birthday, lie back in a comfortable chair and think, there's nobody here screaming and treading bread into the carpet. There's nobody shouting and backing their cars into the flower bed. I'm happy, and I should probably sing. I might well sing. And I'll sing, I ain't got no party. No party cares for me.
Well, by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Denis Norden wins the contest of the two stories, and he and Anne Scott James, as a team, they also win this entire contest, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Denis Norden, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir. Here's round one. For 2 marks, I want to know the meaning of the following words. Anne Scott James, what is gobbledygook? You can spell it 2 ways, but I don't think I need. Gobbledygook.
Rubbish or nonsense?
Yes. Rubbish or nonsense, and I think there's something else added in.
Gibberish?
No, I think it was actually coined by Sir Ernest Gowers.
Yes, he used it.
And it means that kind of the way that bylaws for parks are termed. In other words, that incomprehensible official sort of language.
That's it. That's what I want. 2 marks. You'll find it in, as Dennis says, in civil service circulars or sometimes on the bench. But it was, in fact, invented before Sir Ernest Gowers used it in plain words by a chap called Maury Maverick, who came from Texas. And he copied it from the turkey cocks. Gobbledygook. Frank Muir, what is a pupa? P-U-P-A.
Is it an animal?
It's a sort of medium stage.
Yes?
You know,
it's one of those intermediate stages when between a tadpole before it becomes a butterfly.
It's changed to tadpole for caterpillar, and you're all right.
Now, I think Frank, having got all the biological wires crossed, I'll give him 2 marks at once. We normally call it a chrysalis, and it's the 3rd stage in this metamorphosis on the way towards the complete thing, which is called the imago, like a butterfly. It originally meant a girl or a doll. Why it meant that, I don't know. Dilys Powell, what is a roseace?
It's an ace rose.
No, that doesn't help me very much.
No, but it's something to do with rose.
It's something to do with rose, all right.
It's something rose-shaped.
Yes?
A window.
Yes. What kind of window do you call it?
Or a rose window.
A rose window. That's exactly what I wanted. 2 marks.
Is it one of those with things?
Yes. All right.
Like a cogwheel?
That's right. It's looking quite like a rose window or a design or ornament looking like a rose, or it could be a rosette of the kind that you wear if you're Legion of Honor. Denis Norden, what is an arriviste?
Well, it's a rather out-of-date, derogatory term for, what would you say, for a sort of Johnny-come-lately, a man who enters an organisation and is a whiz kid when everybody else is being rather placid.
That's good enough, Dennis, too. A careerist, somebody who's bent on succeeding, making a good position for himself, probably at the expense of others. 2 marks. Well, before we begin round 2, I read out a quotation for each team to write down, and I hope the 2 women members of the teams will have time to study those quotations during the programme, because at the end I shall ask them where the quotations come from. Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, your quotation is, "It matters not that you win or lose, but how you play the game." And Dilys Powell and Frank, yours is, "Circumstances alter cases." And then in the last round of the programme, I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their ideas of how these came to be said or written. Now round 2. Who, what, why and where questions. Again 2 marks. Anne Scott James, which and where is the world's southernmost city, or at any rate pretty large town?
I should think it's in South America.
Yes?
I thought it was Exeter. I got caught there once on the bypass trying to go north, and I can tell you it's as south as you can get. It took me 4 hours.
In Patagonia, do you think?
Yes, it is.
Patagonia.
Well, it's the capital of Patagonia.
Yep. Punta Arenas, which has 45,000 population in the southern end of Chile on the west shore of the Straits of Magellan. Frank Muir, what's meant by mothering the cups?
Putting milk into the tea, isn't it?
You're jolly nearly right, but it's the action you do before you do that. In the north.
In the north?
Infusing.
Before you put the milk in?
Mothering the cup.
You pour out the tea.
Infuse
Before you poured it out.
Before you pour out the tea?
Before you poured out the tea.
You heat the cups.
It incidentally might do that, but it isn't.
Yes.
That's what it's for.
You put them out, mothering the cups.
No. I'm going to give you a half mark.
Oh.
This may only happen in the north, I don't know. It's pouring a little water into the saucer of a teacup so that the china cup doesn't slip about when you hold cup and saucer in your hand. That's known as mothering the cup.
South, we don't use the cup.
So mugs one and all.
They use mugs up there.
Dilys Powell, who was James Bothwell?
Nice to do with Mary Queen of
Yes.
Scots. Oh, Mary Queen of Scots.
Husband number which?
Husband number which?
Dirty,
Two.
I'm not- yeah.
1.5. James, Earl of Bothwell, was the third husband of Mary Queen of Scots and was possibly implicated in the death of her second husband. who was-
Rizzio.
No, Lord, he never married Rizzio. Lord Darnley. Risking Scottish wrath, James Bothwell was a baddie. 1.5. Denis Norden, what is a twitch bell, and where did you fear it would go when you were very much younger? Twitch and bell put together. Twitch bell.
I dread the answer. I'm sure it's not what I'm thinking. I think a twitch bell must be somebody. We used to call it knocking down ginger, where you pull at a doorbell and run away.
Now, you think of your ear roll.
You what?
Your ear roll.
Oh, I know. I know. Yes, there used to be a legend that earwigs went down your ear.
Yep.
and came out the other side. Or stayed.
1 out of 2. A twitch bell is an earwig, and that's why you were afraid when you were young, at any rate, that it would finish up. It comes, twitch means to pinch, and that's what you thought would happen inside your ear, which is most unpleasant. Now a round of differences. I want you to define the differences in meaning between these pairs of fairly similar-sounding words. 2 marks again. And Scott James, lashkar and lasher.
Well, lashkar is Oriental word.
I think it's Oriental for a tow rope.
Oh, yes, that's right. It's an Indian rope. The one they use for the
Indian
Indian
rope
rope
trick.
trick. That's the lashkar. And a lasher is a man who lashes a boat to the, to the lashing post.
You're halfway between the two meanings of lasher. Stick to one or the other.
It's a whip.
Oh, it's in those porno films.
Definitely not.
Oh.
I'm bound to give you a mark saying lasher is somebody who beats something or somebody, but it wasn't the one I wanted, but never mind. Have a shot at lashkar, which you haven't been very good at
I'm
yet.
not very good at. Indian?
Yes?
Is it like Lascar?
Yes, it's near that.
Ah, it's a man of menial, who does menial work.
Oh, dear.
Wears a loincloth and is something to do with boats on the Ganges.
Well, 1.5. You're going further and further away at that. A lashkar is a body of armed Indian tribesmen or a camp of native Indian soldiers. It simply means a camp in Urdu. A lasher, which I'm surprised you didn't get, Anne, is a bit of water that washes or lashes over an opening in the weir. It's very particularly used in the Thames Basin and its tributaries, or it can be the pool below the weir. It can also be, as Anne quite rightly said, somebody who beats or lashes. 1.5.
It's also, I think, when you used to play with whip and top.
Yes.
The whip was called a lasher, wasn't it?
That's
there are
fair
two
enough,
people
yes.
who are agreeing with me
All right,
on that.
fair enough.
I think I have a majority.
We have enough majority to get 1.5. Frank Muir, tawdry and bawdry.
Yes, they're different, yes. Tawdry, if memory serves me right, is a corruption of St. Audrey.
Yes.
And it's laughing. It's right, St. Audrey was St. Audrey's Fair,
Yes.
at which they sold clothes which were rather sort of gay and tatty, and weren't nearly as good as they appeared to be.
Absolutely right, yes.
So tawdry is tatty,
Yep.
and bawdry isn't. Bawdry is pornographical.
Yes, all right, that's 2 marks. Tawdry comes from St. Audrey's Fair, which was held in the Isle of Ely, and Audrey itself is a shortening of Etheldreda, who was the saint who founded the cathedral at Ely. Bawdry can be various things. It can be unchastity, it can be lewd speech or writing. It can be actually practicing as a bawd who kept a bawdy house. 2 months.
The Board of Avon.
Dilys Powell, pemmican and pentagram.
Pemmican occurs frequently in novelists such as Jules Verne, where he travels in difficult parts and has to have dried meat.
Yes.
It's got a dried meat which you can carry around.
Yes, that's fair enough.
And pentagram is a 5-sided something or other.
Yes, go carefully on this.
A telegram sent from American military. It's saying, come home,
5
but all
words.
will not be forgiven.
Give me its shape. Pentagram. I'll help you a bit. You can also call it a pentacle.
Oh, well, it's a 5-sided shape, which is used in that rather curious card business, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
If it's a pentacle.
By whom?
By whom?
Who uses this sort of thing? Pentacle or pentagram?
Well, I should think somebody up to not quite.
Isn't
not,
it
not much
black magic?
good.
Yes, that's what I wanted.
Black magic.
Yes.
Oh.
Black magic.
I think again, 1 and a half, because that gave some help. Pemmican started with the Red Indians and was what they took on long journeys, a cake of dried or pounded meat mixed with melted fat, and was afterwards used in a more sophisticated way by explorers. And a pentagram is a 5-pointed figure, and you make it by producing the sides of a pentagon both ways to their points of intersection. That gives you a 5-pointed star. It also gives you a continuous line, which was known as the endless knot, and was supposed to be terribly magic, and therefore it was used by witches and magicians. If you stood in the middle of a pentagram, you did pretty well. Denis Norden, pizzicato and pixelated.
Well, pizzicato is Frank's favourite joke. And it means a way of playing the violin by plucking at the strings.
Yes?
Pixelated, I think, came into popularity at the time of a film called Mr. Deeds Goes to Town. Dilys is nodding, I have it on good authority here. And it means sort of, and it was the 2 little old ladies in that film who were pixelated, and it means sort of fey.
Yes. 2 marks straight away. Pizzicato, playing by plucking rather than using the bow in the usual way on violin and similar things. Pixelated, nobody quite knows what it comes from, though there is an earlier English word called pixie-led, which means led astray by pixies, and maybe when this went across to the United States, pixelated was the way in which the word came out. And it does mean confused or crazy. Is it Mr. Deeds comes to town or goes to town?
Comes.
Yes, I thought it was. Thank you, Dilys. 2 marks.
Comes. Yes, and they thought that Mr. Deeds was pixelated.
They did, yes.
Two old ladies, yes, at the trial.
But they then said that everybody in the village was pixelated, so it wasn't awfully good evidence, was it? That's right. Well, here's the last round, and we go back to the 2 quotations I gave the teams earlier in the programme. For 2 marks, Anne Scott James, can you give me the origin of your quotation? It matters not that you win or lose, but how you play the game.
Well, I don't know it. It seems to be the sort of sentiment that I would expect from Newbolt, or failing Newbolt from Kipling. Failing those 2, I've had it.
I think that's a jolly good origin. I'll give you half a mark. It is an American sports columnist who was called Grantland Rice, who did the commentaries on lots and lots of the shorts that people saw in the cinema in the 30s and 40s and 50s, particularly about things like sailing and skiing and so on. And it's a terrible sort of rhyme. It's for when the one great scorer comes to write against your name, it matters not that you win or lose, but how you play the game. That's why I'm going to give you half a mark, because Sir Henry Newbolt said rather similar things. Now, Dilys Powell, the origin of yours. Circumstances alter cases.
Sounds like a proverb.
It's become a proverb, yes.
Become a proverb?
Yeah.
For a long time?
Not all that long.
Not all that long?
No.
Oh, 19th century?
Yep.
Dickens.
Yes, all right. It's Dickens in Edwin Drood, the unfinished novel, in chapter 9. There are, I think, things rather similar to it that had been said a century earlier by Lord Chesterfield, and Dickens used it almost in the same way twice. He also talked about fortuitous combination of circumstances. And now I'm going to ask Denis and Frank to give me their explanations of how these particular quotations came into being. And the marks for this round only will be decided by the length of applause which each receives from the audience here in the theatre. So, back to Denis. It matters not that you win or lose, but how you play the game.
If some of you have been wondering why a son of mine is now working as a part-time rifle range attendant, let me explain the circumstances. I've cut off his pocket money completely. I have to tell you why. See, what I must make clear first is that the lad is really no different from any other university student of his age and weight. In other words, hip-length hair and bristling all over with inflammatory lapel badges. No, not that I've got anything against those. If I may paraphrase Voltaire, I may disagree with what your lapel badge says, but I will fight to the death for your right to stick it. No, you see, what brought it on was one evening last week when I was moved to read out loud to him something that I'd just seen in the paper. Now, that wasn't an easy operation because his generation, anything that hasn't got a steady beat going behind it, they don't listen to. But I said, listen to this. There's been an earthquake in Asia that killed 48,000 people. You know what he said? Wow. I said, what does that mean? He said, what? I said, wow. He said, well, you know, that's another thing that they say a lot. You know, it's kind of verbal security blanket that they pull right over their heads. I said, I don't know. What does wow mean? He says, it means, like, wow. I said, wow is not even a word. It is merely the second half of the noise that a dog makes. I inform you of a human disaster of unparalleled magnitude, and all you can articulate is an attenuated bark. He said, look, man, don't get uptight. There are phrases that they use that have simply, as it were, crossed into another country. The word demonstrator. In my time, a demonstrator was somebody who sold potato peelers. Black power was stewed prunes. I tried to explain all this to my son, the student. When I was your age, I said, the only protest march was when a girl decided to get out of the car and walk home. What have you and your lot done to my language? He looked at me with that expressionless look that they have. Dad, he said, you better start getting it together. With which he lifted up the two girl students he was lying on and left the house. I shouted after him, getting it together was what we did with a jigsaw puzzle. And I slumped back, sobbing a little. I thought to myself, I bet he thinks that I'm becoming middle-aged. Blooming sauce. And that was when I cut off his allowance, thus proving another precept which is very dear to my generation. It matters not whether you win or lose, but where you lay the blame.
It's the most poignantly moral story I've ever heard Denis tell. And we'll move on to Frank Muir, and if you remember, his line was, circumstances alter cases.
Quiet everywhere, please. I'm going to talk to you briefly and unhumorously for about 4 minutes on the subject of luggage. In the 14th century, when knights wore their armour, I won't describe all the parts of the armour, it's a fairly unriveting subject, but over all their armour, they had a loose kind of cloth, rectangular piece of cloth with a hole in the middle, which they shoved their head through. This was called a tabard, and the knight had his colours painted fore and aft, or his coat of arms, so that his companions could recognise which was he. And the knights and pages invented a little case for this thing, which went over the top, and that was what is called an overnight case. In 17th century Russia, the Romanov jewels were carried by a boyar girl, one of the nobility, whose name was Natasha Uspenskaya. And Natasha Uspenskaya designed a simple little leather box, a rather flat leather box, just to hold these crown jewels. And the box was named after her. But nowadays somehow it's gone slightly out of fashion. You never hear people talking of a Natasha case, do you? In the early 19th century and the late 18th century, vegetables suddenly became grown to a much greater extent. Turnips, for instance, were cultivated. What is now London Airport was a thriving market garden area. And for fertiliser, they used to use soot from the wide chimneys, which the little boys were sent up to sweep. And the sweeps used to have a very stout box which was sort of hermetically sealed so that the soot couldn't escape when they sold it to the market gardeners, and it was dumped on the land. And that was called a suitcase. These are still sometimes used. Also in the early 19th century, when a man's toe was so painful with gout that he sent for the doctor. He'd been drinking too much port, and the doctor used to arrive with the medicine in a little bag which they called a portmanteau. The only new sort of luggage this century was one invented for businessmen, who 20th century business life is very nervy, and you have a lot of very fastidious men, and some people like a change of pants during the day, and so they invented the briefcase. I think I've given you the history of luggage. Now, as regards to my personal luggage, I was going away on holiday, and I couldn't close them. It was all the sliced bread we were taking because we were going to France, and all that crunchy stuff, upsets your teeth. And I couldn't close the lid, and I rang Dennis and said, I can't close my lid. And he said, well, get somebody to dance up and down on the top, and you will. Which a friend of mine happened to call him. It's Harry Seacombe called him. And he jumped up and down on the cases doing his little war dance, and he squashed them flat. So really, that's the history of luggage. But if you want to close cases, get somebody to dance on it. But do be careful who you get, is all I say. Or otherwise, as Charles Dickens said, Seacombe's dances alter cases.
Ladies and gentlemen, by your vote, Frank Muir wins the contest of the two stories, but nevertheless, Anne Scott James and Denis Norden win the entire contest, and that brings us to an end of this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Denis Norden, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir. And here's round one to test their vocabulary. 2 marks if they get the thing right. Anne Scott James begins. Anne, what is Galatea?
Gala is the Greek for milk. So a Galatea is a tremendous orgy where you only drink milk.
Kind of orgy on a health farm.
Exactly. 2 marks.
They're not getting any marks yet.
Oh.
I want to know what colour it is and what it's made of.
Yeah, well, it's white, you see.
Yes? All right, 1 out of 2. Galatea is a striped and rather superior cotton dress material which was used for children's sailor suits when children wore sailor suits. In other words, white with blue lines in appropriate places. And it came, surprisingly enough, from one of Her Majesty's ships, Her Majesty's ship Galatea. 1 out of 2. Frank Muir, what is a piolet? P-I-O-L-E-T. Piolet.
Piolet? It's when the Frenchman goes to the loo after drinking too much milk.
It's also, Frank, what poor George Mallory, as he perished, left behind on the slopes of Mount Everest.
A thing you climb with?
Yes.
A thing you climb
Like
with?
Yeah.
Yes, it's a kind of
Piéton.
crampon.
Not quite piéton, no.
It's a crampon.
No, it's not quite. You're climbing ice and snow, and you need something to help you.
Oh, a pickaxe. An ice pick.
All right.
A pick ice.
1 out of 2.
Pack ice.
Piolet is the alpinist's ice axe, and it comes from the Savoy dialect in French. It's a diminutive of pic or piolo. Dilys Powell, what is or are pincette? P-I-N-C-E-T-T-E with an S on the end if you like. Pincette.
It's glasses, spectacles.
It isn't, but what do those particular glasses do?
They pinch.
Yep. Now, think of something else that pinches. Yes.
Pinchers, yes.
French pinchers.
you-
Or voleur.
You don't normally call them pinchers.
Gendarme.
You call them...
Tweezers.
Yes, that's what I wanted. I think you've just creeped home.
And without help.
Pincette are small pincers or tweezers. Denis Norden, what is pinola? P-I-N-O-L-E. Pinola.
Why do you call it pinola when it's spelt pinole?
Because it... because it...
A pinole. If I can do pinole. A pinole is what a nudist has on his chest after a flag day. But pinola is it's a food,
Yes,
the way
that's
you
right.
pronounce it.
That's right. Pinola is a meal made from parched corn flour mixed with sweet flour, and if you ask me about that one, I gather it's made of the mesquite bean, which I've never met, and sometimes mixed also with sugar and spice, and it's American Spanish and originally Aztec. Before we begin round 2, I give each team a quotation for them to write down, and I want the 2 women members of the teams to go on studying those quotations, because at the end of the programme I should ask where those quotations come from. And we begin with Anne Scott James and Denis Norden. Your quotation is, "His word is as good as his bond." And Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, your quotation is, "Not with a bang, but a whimper." And then at the end of the programme I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their ideas of how these came to be said or written. In the next round, I give the members of the team a line from a poem, and I want 3 things for 3 marks. First of all, the line that goes immediately before the line I'm quoting. Second, the title of the poem. And third, the name of the poet. Anne Scott James. Do noble things, not dream them all day long.
Be good, sweet maid.
Let who will be clever.
That's right. Not quite.
It's much better with the other punctuation, where you say, be good, sweet maid, and let who will be clever.
Yeah. Do you remember who wrote this?
Yeah. Charles Kingsley.
Yes, quite right. And, well, the title of the poem is very hard, I think, to get.
Very hard, yes, we'll
Be good, sweet
that.
maid.
The maid.
All right, 2 out of 3 straight away. Be good, sweet maid, and let who can be clever. This slightly alters the sense. Do noble things, not dream them all day long. By Charles Kingsley. It's a poem called A Farewell to C.E.G., and I don't know who C.E.G. was. And so make life and death and that vast forever one grand sweet song. Pretty optimistic poem. Frank Muir, Alone and palely loitering.
Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, alone and palely loitering? The sedge is withered by the lake, and no birds sing. La belle dame sans merci, and it's by Keats.
3 marks straight away. Well done. All right, on to Dilys Powell. All's right with the world.
It's Browning.
Yes?
And it's Pippa's song or something.
Yes? Remember what comes before?
Wait a minute.
Quite easy.
God's in his head.
That's right. Absolutely right. 3 marks. Denis Norden. And I can't pronounce this, Denis, and I'm
It's
sorry.
Scottish.
It is.
Burns. It's by Burns.
That's 1 mark already. Great chieftain of the pudding race.
Oh, that's Tua Haggis.
Yes.
And I can't remember. It's something about a sonsy face.
Yes, that's nearly good enough.
But I don't know the rest of the line.
I think you're going to get your 3. Fair far your honest sonsy face, great chieftain of the pudding race, aboon them ye tack your place, Pinch, tripe, or therm. And if you ask me what therm is, I haven't the faintest idea.
I was going to ask you about the accent for
3 marks. The next round is a round of who, what, why, and where questions, and 2 marks for answers. Anne Scott James, what's the meaning of the expression noblesse oblige?
It means that your high position in the world obliges you to behave well.
Yes, that's good enough. 2 marks. Privilege entails responsibility. The very fact of noble birth imposes on the chap who has noble birth obligations of principles and noble actions and so on, even if not always carried out. Frank Muir, what are sideburns and how did they get their name?
Sideburns are hirsute appendages, forward of the ears and lower than the normal hairline.
Yes, how did they get their name?
On the extremities of the face. midway between the nose and the back of the head. I think that they got their name from one of those curious inversions from somebody called Burnside.
Well done. Do you remember what he was?
A general.
Absolutely right, and General. Well done, Frank. 2 marks. Dennis Powell, and careful here. What is a miniature, and why is it so called?
A miniature?
I'm not talking about dogs.
I think it means red.
Yes, quite right.
I think it was the decoration of the initial letter of parchments.
2 marks straight away.
Oh, that's really good.
A miniature, when you meet it at auction, is a very expensive small painting, sometimes, perhaps usually a portrait, quite often painted on ivory. But originally, as Frank is absolutely right about this, it was what's called rubrication. It was a small painting done with minium or vermilion or red lead in an illuminated manuscript where the capital letters, as you remember, were usually in red and gold. And so it came from that, which was just an illustration of a manuscript, to mean any small portrait or picture on ivory or vellum. But it doesn't mean what it sounds like meaning. That is, miniature doesn't mean small. It doesn't mean Latin minor or minimus. It simply means the actual paint or material you used in painting it. Denis Norden, by what nickname was the landscape gardener and architect Lancelot Brown, who lived from 1715 to 1783, popularly known as, and why?
He was called Capability Brown.
And why?
Because he had some kind of catchphrase that whenever he was offered a job, he would say, I see the capability in there. Or some phrase. It was something along those lines.
Absolutely
Well,
right.
there's a super story of because he was not much admired in his period.
No.
And somebody met him and said, I hope I die before you do, Mr. Brown. And he said, why? And he said, I'd like to see heaven before you've improved it.
Well, between you, 2 marks, well earned again. He was one of the founders of what's called the modern or English style of landscape gardening. He was known as Capability Brown, Dennis is quite right, because he always assured any prospective employers who were likely to pay him that their land held great capabilities for landscape gardening. And now we come to the last round and go back to those quotations I gave the 2 teams earlier in the programme. 2 marks, please, Anne Scott James. Can I have the origin of your quotation? His word is as good as his bond.
Well, it's what his mother said about Ian Fleming, I think. Speaking well of her child.
It does come a little earlier than that.
Comes earlier than that.
Famous Spanish character.
Don Quixote.
It does come in Cervantes' Don Quixote. An honest man's word is as good as his bond. And now, Dennis Powell, could you give me the origin of your quotation, which was, not with a bang, but a whimper?
T.S. Eliot. And the line before is, this is the way the world ends, not with a bang but a whimper. It's called Hollow Men.
Oh, well done, quite right. You get 2 marks.
How the way?
Well, now I'm going to ask Dennis and Frank to tell me their explanations of how these quotations came into being. And for this round, the marks will go to whichever explanation receives the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So back to Denis Norden and his quotation. His word is as good as his bond.
This phrase, or an approximation of it, is what they're now saying about my favourite conjurer, Nigel St. Clair, society illusionist. Now, there, if ever there was one, was a victim of the permissive society. As you know, nowhere nowadays is permissiveness more rampant than in the live theatre. Complete, total nudity is now accepted by every member of the theatrical profession, with the possible exception of lady accordion players. However, there is one branch of the profession which has really suffered from this trend. Now, any member of the magic circle will tell you that if there's one thing that nudity is totally incompatible with, it's conjuring. And a moment's thought will tell you why. Because a conjurer with no clothes on has nowhere to hide his equipment. All those doves and silk handkerchiefs and aces of spades, there's nowhere where he can secrete them. So this trend hit Nigel Sinclair very badly, particularly badly as he was already under somewhat of a cloud with managements due to an unfortunate accident he'd had when performing his sawing a lady in half illusion. As he said to me afterwards, if you allow your attention to wander for just 1 second, which he did. Luckily, it wasn't fatal. The lady concerned recovered and is now living very happily in Manchester and Devon. But this accident, coupled with, as I say, this public demand for more and more nudity, definitely meant hard times for Nigel Sinclair. Till finally, piece by piece, he was reduced to selling his equipment. The 3 interlocking steel rings, clash, clash. They went to a scrap metal merchant. The line of 15 tied together, knotted together, multicolored silk handkerchiefs. They went to a property developer with a heavy cold. And the 6 doves, they went as well to various peace rallies, until at Christmas only one dove remained, Desmond, who wasn't at that even a real dove, a pigeon with body makeup. And there, in that cold little room, Nigel looked at Desmond hungrily, but he didn't even have a fire over which he could cook him. So he made the supreme sacrifice. Ladies and gentlemen, if one wanted to illustrate the evil of the permissive society, could one paint a bleaker picture than an out-of-work conjurer cooking an over-made-up pigeon over his burning wand? That was the supreme sacrifice, because to get rid of your wand for a conjurer is the end of the road. But fate is a fickle jade, because in the very next room in this dingy boarding house lived a striptease artist who'd fallen on hard times. Her name was Alice B. Topless. Well, the rest, ladies and gentlemen, is show business history. You've seen it on the bills. Nigel Sinclair and Alice, magic with a difference. Because although I told you that a conjurer without a wand is unemployable, let us for a moment consider what the function of a wand is. It is what they call for misdirection. When he taps a wand onto the metallic box that he's holding, it's so that your eye will go to the box and not notice what his other hand is doing with it behind his back. However, you can dispense with a wand if, at the crucial moment of the trick, instead of a wand, as you hold out the box, the shapely bird beside you suddenly drops all her clothes to the floor. And it was this gimmick, as we call it in show business circles, which led to the success Nigel is enjoying today, and indeed to the phrase which I quoted earlier and which everybody's saying about Nigel now. His bird is as good as his wand.
shall always cherish the picture of the lady who lived simultaneously in Manchester and Devon. And now we go on to Frank Muir, and if you remember, his line was, "Not with a bang, but a whimper."
This is a broadcast on behalf of the Association for Resisting the Standardization of Everything. I'm going to talk to you in the few minutes they've given me, fully and frankly, about the way standardization is spoiling humanity. They standardize trousers so that you have to fit the trouser waistbands, not the trouser waistbands you. There is a size of 44-inch waistband, and there is a size of 46-inch waistband. There is no such thing in this country of the free as a 45-inch waistband. I have a 45-inch waist. The consequence is, when reaching up to change a light bulb, my trousers fall down. Or, if I buy a 44 pair of trousers, 2 or 3 days later, quite forgetting they are slightly too small, I have a strange feeling that the impossible has in fact happened and that I am pregnant. This cannot be right, can it? Abraham Lincoln said all men are created equal, and women slightly misquote it and say men are all the same. But Abraham Lincoln was speaking the voice of authority, and they are trying to crush our individuality. Must they standardize our beer? All beer's the same. No draft beer. It's all pushed up by gas, up through tubes so it froths out into your glass. Where are the beer engines, the beer pumps? But I found one, but they've been at the barmaids. I said, a pint of mild and bitter. She said, you'll have one or the other. I'm not going to keep bobbing about. But worst of all, my friends, worst of all, they are standardizing our food. I'll tell you a way. For instance, steak and kidney pie is made in canteens with a separate crust. The pie is not cooked with a crust. They are cooked in separate ovens. This is against nature. It is like putting honeymoon couples in separate bedrooms. Bread. Where's the crust gone? Where has the crusty loaf gone? Mother sends you out for it. On the way back, it used to have an overlapping crusty bit you could break off and chew on the way home. And she didn't notice and didn't thump you when you got... You can't now. Where is it, the bread, that when you cut it, crumbs as hard as diamonds went up your sleeve? Now you get a packet of polythene foam. They say it lasts for 10 days, but why should it? Shakespeare said in Antony and Cleopatra, in reference to bread, to this sliced bread, he said, age cannot wither it, nor jam conceal its infinite lack of variety. But worst of all of our foods they've standardized is a good old-fashioned sausage. Now, a sausage was like us. Every sausage was slightly different from the next sausage. Linked we might be by jobs or marriage, but we were slightly different. We weighed slightly differently from our next neighbor. Sausages? No. They're dispensed with now. Now you have geometric circles, each one exactly the same thickness, containing exactly the same amount of meat, exactly the same color. Cheap they may well be, nourishing they may well be, but all the individuality's gone out of them. And that's what's going to happen to us unless you join my association, prevent the standardization. No entrance fees or anything like that. Just send me £5 and call it quits. You know. But unless we stop this, we're going to end up like the sausage and become just one of those little things you buy. T.S. Eliot warned in his book about the politicians, The Hollow Men. T.S. Eliot said, this is how the world ends. Not with a banger, but with a wimpy.
by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Frank Muir wins the contest of the stories, and he and his partner, Dilys Powell, win the entire contest, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC.